What's up, everybody? Somebody asked if Ruckus was going to make it over here to Static History, and of course, it ain't a party without a little ruckus. This was pretty funny the other day with the Frisbee helmet. First thing, I want to clarify what I mean by using the term mud flood here. Unfortunately, the internet managed to turn it into something that I disagree with 95% of. What I do agree with is past catastrophes have left cities in rubble and buried in mud. But unfortunately, what it came to mean for a lot of people is all history is fake, so we can just look at photos and make up our own history. And hey, it does save all of the trouble of actually having to learn history. To put things simply, history is just like watching our modern news cycle. Take the Nord Stream pipeline, for example. We all know what happened here, but officially, Putnikov detonated his own pipeline. They're twisting the truth to fit a narrative they want to push, but that doesn't mean that the event was fake. We're just being lied to about what happened. Well, that's pretty much what we've got for the last 700 years since the 14th century Black Death catastrophes that left places like Rome here buried in another layer of mud. Rome goes down like 6 stories. But up to 2/3 of the population was annihilated at this time, and then people like the Medici banking dynasty financed the Renaissance, the rebirth, and crafted the narrative we call official history. Then the Church of Rome and the Jesuits took over the education systems worldwide. And if you've never read this, you should really pause and read it. And I know people always tell me, no, the Red Shields and friends are running the show, and that's the case today, but they came up beginning of 1800s, and before that, for 300-400 years, it was the Catholic Church. So no, I don't agree with the textbook version of things, but I also watched a bunch of creators just tell everybody what seemed like the most popular thing to say at the time, so I don't agree with the internet version of things either. But I really don't have to sensationalize things, because if you actually dig into the history, it shows these cycles. Like this, the oldest stories known to man tell of ancient destruction. All of the ancient cultures have their mythologies that describe the world being obliterated in different ways. The Aztecs say we're in the age of the 5th sun, meaning the earth has been wiped out 4 other times. They say the last one was by a great flood, which is pretty much ubiquitous around the world. Everybody knows about the Great Flood. And they say before that, it was wiped out by fire. Then Greek mythology tells of Deucalion and the Great Flood, and before him was Phaethon and the world being destroyed by fire. So both of these cultures say flood, and then before that, fire. Just so you know, I'm going through and playing some clips from old videos here, so the audio's different. And all of the people that followed me over here can vouch for the fact that I was one of the first mud flooders, so I feel like I still have a little bit of right to that title. But the conclusions I've drawn from my own research differs greatly from what I've heard from other people. In future videos, we'll talk about more recent stuff like the 1812 era events, the Maunder Minimum, the Little Ice Age, but in this one, we're going to talk about the ancient history of things. What you're looking at here is called Doggerland, and at one time the English Isles and Ireland were all connected to mainland Europe. And this isn't speculation. They find man-made structures at the bottom of the English Channel. What is of debatable authenticity is the Oera Linda book, but what they describe in here is so spot on with the accounts of the 536 AD event, the 1300s event, that make me think it's true. Or it could even be a combination of truth and fiction. But if it's fiction, the author knew exactly what happens during these cycles. The event that I'm reading about here is supposed to have happened about 4,000 years ago. During the whole summer, the sun had been hid behind the clouds as if unwilling to look upon the earth. There was perpetual calm, and the damp mist hung like a wet sail over the houses and the marshes. The air was heavy and oppressive, and in men's hearts was neither joy nor cheerfulness. In the midst of this stillness, the earth began to tremble as if she was dying. The mountains opened to vomit forth fire and flames. Some sank into the bosom of the earth, and in other places mountains rose out of the plain. Auld land, called by the seafaring people Atland, disappeared, and the wild waves rose so high over hill and dale that everything was buried in the sea. Many people were swallowed up by the earth, and others who had escaped the fire perished in the water. During 3 years, this continued, but at length it ceased, and forests became visible. Many countries were submerged, and in other places land rose above the sea, and the wood was destroyed through half of Germany. And then they go on to say that the troops who stuck together were okay, but the people that were dispersed by it were exterminated or made slaves. So they learned to stick together. Now, where we're talking about here, they refer to it as Jutland, modern day Denmark, the peninsula that sticks up to the north there. Though the names are similar between Atlan and Atlantis, I don't think there's any relation. I don't think it's a retelling of the story. This is a history of the Frieslanders. And without getting into the problems of the timeline, this would be 2000 BC as to where Plato's Atlantis would have been thousands of years before that. But the author also mentions the Cimbrian flood, which is about 100 BC during Roman times. We'll get into that a little bit later. So let's just picture this. All of a sudden you wake up one morning and everything is hazy. The sun isn't giving forth its light very well. And I've heard it hypothesized this could be associated with the Hopi blue Kachina, because the red light rays, infrared rays and everything are getting blocked by either volcanic ash or impact debris, and all you're getting is the blue light waves through. So the sun stops shining and the wind stops blowing. And when I get to the 14th century, you're going to hear the exact same thing from China and Europe and the Incas in America. Though I think the order of events vary, and that's where I'm really trying to sleuth things out right now. But there's no sun, there's no wind, everything's quiet, and then the screaming begins. I mean, it just breaks off into earthquakes. In the way they describe the mountains open to vomit forth fire and flames, a dormant volcano springing to life, a new one forming. I don't know, because in other places, mountains rose out of the plain. Now, that may sound fantastical, and modern science will say it's absolutely impossible, but this is described over and over again. In some places, the mountain rose up. In other places, the earth opened up or caved in, and people along with it. Again, accounts of the 14th century of this happening in France. And with that much land displacement, if you live anywhere near the sea, then you are bound to get hit by a tsunami. And you would definitely think after all this that you've incurred the wrath of the gods. And this wasn't just a quick hit and over. This went on for 3 years. Now, it probably wasn't nonstop, but you probably didn't get much peace at that time. Take, for example, the New Madrid earthquakes of 1812. Those went on for like 11 months, and they varied in intensity. Then a big one came of like 7, and then about a month later was the really big one, like an 8. People literally thought it was the end of the world. Whole bluffs fell off into the Mississippi River. It ran backwards. Reelfoot Lake was formed in a very short time frame. And you had sand boils where sand would just liquefy up out of the ground. And I honestly think that what happened in New Madrid 1812 was mild in comparison to some of the events that have happened further back in the past. And if that's not enough to keep you up at night, the whole damn country sitting downwind of you is on fire and just blowing ash over on you. The book also says that this stands inscribed upon all citadels. So I also want to point out that these are what the Romans would describe as barbarians, but they did have a writing system in 2000 BC. And inscribed on the citadels was, "Before the bad time came, our country was the most beautiful in the world. The sun rose higher, and there was seldom frost." These are the people of the Jutland Peninsula, just south of Norway. And here I'm showing you guys a tropical forest found under Arctic Norway. Now let's see, how old is this according to the Quackademics? Oh yeah, that's, 380 million years old, give or take a few million. Oh yeah, well, you guys just found out about this 6 years ago. And here I'm reading a book that was translated from another language back in 1848. And he's describing that it was once a more tropical land up in that area and the sun rose higher. Hell, it seldom even frost. The trees and shrubs produce various fruits, which are now lost. Okay, just so you guys know, I'm starting with some really old clips of mine here, so the quality of everything will get better. But they have found woolly mammoths up in northern Siberia in the permafrost that still have fresh buttercup flowers in their stomachs. So it was a completely different climate zone with all kinds of different vegetation up there at the time. And the Oera Linda book says that the sun used to be higher up in the sky there. Now, I don't know if this is a throwback to Saturn being the original sun, which is a whole different topic, but they're saying that the sun has shifted away from the Arctic regions. And we kind of have undeniable proof that there was a catastrophic event that could be described as a mud flood. I can't remember this guy's name, but if you look up Joe Rogan woolly mammoth bones, you'll find him. He bought a piece of property and started hydraulic mining for gold on there and started finding mammoth bones and all of these extinct creatures. He now has hundreds of thousands of animals that he's found, and this is just one day's work right here. In this pile is a mammoth hip bone that has a splinter of another bone lodged into it. So something drastic happened to crush up bone and smash it together hard enough to jab into the hip bone of a mammoth. Hundreds of thousands of animals were caught up in this and were all deposited here in these mud banks. And this isn't the only example of this. Randall Carlson on Geocosmic Rex lists several more of these. And all of this was hidden from the public because they were trying to amplify the uniformitarian point of view and downplay catastrophism. So here's another clip from an older video. I'm sorry about the audio, but it's still worthwhile research. And they even say in this book that the Mediterranean was visited terribly by this. Well, it just so happens that it's a scientific fact that this area was hit by disasters that we couldn't even imagine today, Hollywood-style disasters. And in spite of what some YouTubers would have you believe, not all scientists and geologists are idiots. They're very smart people, but to keep their job, they have to stick with their official timelines. A couple hundred years ago, there was debates between catastrophism and uniformitarianism. Georges Cuvier was looking at the landscape and saying, this is all carved out by catastrophes. But that idea backed up the biblical narrative of a worldwide flood, and so they couldn't have that in their scientific academia, so they came up with the idea of uniformitarianism, where these geological processes take billions of years and it's so complicated you couldn't possibly understand. But now, as more and more data is compiled, they're finding the evidence of catastrophism everywhere, but they have to make it fit into the uniformitarianism timeline. So for them, they say that this event happened 8,000 years ago. And it may have, because we're dealing with cyclical events here. But anyway, back in our ancient history is what I'm talking. We have what is known as the Storegga slides. This was a huge underwater landslide that generated a huge, I'm going to call it a wave because of how this platform is, but they found evidence of a huge wave submerging Britain, and they went out and started checking the ocean floor, and they found this missing bite here where 80,000 square kilometers, a small country, fell off the side of a cliff underwater. And for a little size comparison, this generated 2,000 times the energy that Mount St. Helens did. Now, at first, official science actually had that event and the submersion of what is known as Doggerland, because Europe used to be connected all the way up through the UK and beyond, and they say that sea levels were much lower back then. Now, they finally admitted that, yeah, okay, the Storegga slides probably happened at the same time as the submersion of Doggerland, but they still leave like 100-year window in there. They say, oh, it happened a little bit and filled in the marshlands, and then sea level gradually rose due to CC, and they still can't admit the idea of, okay, there might have been a huge catastrophe and this area was submerged all at once. Because that's what the folk tales and mythologies say all around the world. The vast majority of all archaeological discoveries are made by ordinary people like you and me. That Roman villa earlier, that was a guy stumbling across it in his field. Göbekli Tepe, discovered by a farmer. This site at the bottom of the English Channel, discovered by some divers. And I'm yet to see anybody posting on YouTube anywhere where anybody has discovered a Tartarian washing machine or bulldozer, just in case you're wondering. But when people find obvious man-made structures under the English Channel, they have to come up with something, right? Now, I'm not sure exactly what this is. To me, it looks like maybe some livestock fencing or something, but, you know, it could be the roof of a house. But they found man-made primitive tools, the way they describe it, you know, flint and whatnot. And this is just one of several discoveries that they made where they found obvious man-made objects submerged under, you know, modern day sea levels. So we have clear evidence that sea levels have risen, and also, you know, like 90% of all the world's population lives within, you know, 20 miles of the ocean nowadays, but back then it would have been 1 or 2 miles. I mean, people lived on the coast where rivers ran into the ocean. So sea levels were definitely lower back then, and most people have probably heard of Bimini Road off the coast of Florida. And one of the things that I pointed out in my very first videos was that UNESCO World Heritage Sites and National Forest and Parks own all of the property that's covering up these ancient disasters. Anyway, back over to Britain. They've got the evidence of this big wave and the sediment all over the place. They know it happened. And then let's look at the archaeological sites in the UK. And I want to talk about the different styles of architecture just a little bit. Now, if one style of building can be built in one part of the world, it can be built in any other part of the world. But that doesn't mean that everybody's building style would be uniform, just like today's big cities have structural steel skyscrapers while I live in a wood house. So we have this almost Kiva pit style structure that was unearthed by a storm in Scotland. So it was obviously completely buried on the coast of Scotland. Now, you got everything from that to new discoveries coming out all the time that are what we'd call the classic Roman style. And you find statues in this kind of condition. Now, this could be from a catastrophe. It could be from a bunch of pissed off peasants revolting, if the case were that these people had come in as a ruling class. And I want to do a video just on the role of women in history, because it's a lot different than what we've been taught. And you can see here's the obviously a rich, powerful, or I don't know, this may have just been an average woman of the time, but women were prominent figures in society for a very long time. The Oera Linda book, I mean, the maidens ran the city basically. But I guess my question would be is, were all of these events thousands of years apart? Here we're looking at a depiction from the story from the Iliad on this person's floor that's now an ancient archaeological site to us. And then I want to read a little bit out of the Oera Linda book. And keep in mind, I have no idea if this book is legit or if it was a 19th century forgery. So I just throw everything into my bucket, and when I find more corroborating evidence, then it sticks. But the Oera Linda book has various entries at different timelines. They're keeping track of time since the sinking of Atlant, and we're roughly a couple hundred years past that. And they say that at this point in time, after 12 years had elapsed without or seeing any other foreigners, basically, there came 3 ships, finer than any that we possessed or had ever seen. On the largest of them was a king from, they got a different name for the island, but the king's name was Ulysses, the fame of whose wisdom was great. He brought great treasures and above all, jewels for women more beautiful than had ever been seen before. They were from Troy, a town that the Greeks had taken. Now, I don't care how you look at it, as far back as all histories go, they all describe a worldwide culture with different trade networks with different countries. But this rise and fall of civilization seems to be punctuated by catastrophes where they aren't able to travel for a while. Now, this could be due to the fact that they're just trying to survive. It's just basic survival instincts. But here's a thought I had. What if it's because the seas are unnavigable? In the Iliad, Ulysses is advised to steer clear of a certain island because there's a whirlpool out there that devours ships. So could it be that after a catastrophe, the waters are too turbulent for people to be able to sail them? And then let's take that a step further. What if originally everything was all nice, still, and calm, and then an event occurred that caused a huge splash in the oceans, and the water's been rocking back and forth ever since, creating our... Okay, this is why I put the Firmament video up just before this one, because I've heard a lot of people say that the firmament is an impenetrable dome separating us from, quote, space. If you want a full explanation on why that is wrong, you can watch the video, but simply put, the firmament is the separation between the entire material universe and the pleroma, the heaven above heavens. In future videos, I'll be reading you the first-hand accounts of these impact events, so I wouldn't advise rejecting all of that evidence because of the firmament, because that's just a misinterpretation of what the firmament is. Now, my interpretation of the bigger picture here is that Doggerland was submerged, possibly in what most people call the Younger Dryas event. And I love how they say these things happen gradually over time. Have you ever seen water take its time? Here's a small-scale example breaking down a beach berm. Start off with a little bitty channel, and then about an hour later, you've got this, and then about an hour after that, you've got a raging river that has carved out 50 yards wide of material. Water doesn't gradually do anything. Once it decides to go, it goes. I'm not really going to argue what caused this. I just know that it did happen. And I think that these Storega slides could have been some of the last embankments to collapse and fall into the water. Those are just some guesses, of course, but what is fact is there are man-made structures at the bottom of the English Channel. I've found them in the bottom of Lake Michigan, off the coast of India, North Africa. There's a lot of these. The ancient city of Ephesus is in Ephesians from the Bible. Their ancient port is now 7 miles away from the ocean. So even since the time of the ancients, the landscape has drastically changed. Anyway, I've got a whole lot of undeniable evidence of ancient cataclysms. And if you're into this kind of thing, make sure you're subscribed and stick around. If you liked it, hit the like button and help out the channel. And I promise the video and audio quality will get better as we go here. Like I said, I'm starting with some of the oldest stuff here. And the best material I'm just going to make whole new videos about. I'll catch you guys on the next one. Static out.